Welcome, everyone. Gonna let everyone take a moment to get their computers connected and make sure your audio is working. We are so glad that you are joining us today. My name is Aziza Hassan. I'm the Executive Director of New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish Partnership for Change. We are so grateful that you're willing to join us today, especially for this particular conversation. It can feel impossible to find any words given the enormity of the suffering that people have been and continue to experience. And that's why we're here, because we need to be able to continue to talk about the hard things, to hold the hard things, to hold our own pain, and to witness and bear witness to the pain of others. Because despair and giving up isn't an option. We need to be able to find a path together. And so we are here with the two authors of The Wall Between: What Jews and Palestinians Don't Want to Know About Each Other, with Jeffrey Wilkinson and Reja Khouri. We are so grateful that you are here with us today. In a moment, Ben's gonna spotlight both of them. We will have a 1-hour conversation. And in the midst of that conversation, if you are an audience member and you would like to ask any questions, please feel free to send your questions in the chat and we'll try to weave them in as we go. And following this conversation, we'll move into our breakout rooms for anyone who wants to stay on. And that'll last for a good 30 minutes in smaller groups to be able to continue the conversation. But for this first part, I want to lean in to a quote that appears towards the beginning of the book. It really caught our eye at New Ground, especially in its closeness to our work. And here's the quote. "We've become not only entirely dysfunctional to our discourse, we've become undyingly loyal to this dysfunction. It's time to chart a new path, to challenge the narratives that have both been so embedded that we are not really hearing each other at all." End quote. And so our questions to our authors is this: what led to the two of you deciding to write a book that would address this dysfunctional discourse? And tell us what those conversations were like. What was hardest and most constructive? Jeffrey, I think we'll start with you.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm very extremely glad to be here. So the first thing I kind of want to address is this idea of being loyal to our dysfunction. It probably sounds like a strident thing to say, but it really is how we work as people. We are absolutely loyal to the known because the unknown is threatening. So even if our dysfunction doesn't really work for us in some ways, we become kind of adhered to it because it's predictable. We know how it's going to work. We know how we're going to feel. We know how we're going to react. And we don't know if we actually started to let go of it. So that's the first thing, is to be able to kind of detoxify that term. So what led us? I mean, there are many answers. I think the core answer for me as a Jew is that I became really increasingly uncomfortable with having to make a choice. I either had to be loyal to my family story of the Holocaust, of my own experiences, and or I had to, kind of abandon them and be loyal to my new learning, to my Palestinian friends, to my interest in rights and justice for Palestinians. And it really became clear to me that this was a non-choice, that the only way to move forward was by taking all trauma, all pain seriously, to take anti-Semitism seriously, and be able to call out its misuses. That these binaries are very unhealthy, and that there is no disconnect between me caring for Jews, for our safety, for our story, and caring for Palestinians. And in fact, if you truly care about Jewish safety, for me, I've come to the conclusion quite some time ago that creating peace and harmony with our Palestinian cousins is the only way to have Jewish safety. So I don't see the two as disconnected. And the last thing I'll say is that really listening to stories like Raja's never threatened my story. It only enhanced it. And that continues to be the case.
Well, I was born in Lebanon to Palestinian parents who had fled Palestine, and I'm old enough to have lived through the 67 war and the many, many, many wars that came after it. I knew about Israel from my own experience of being at the receiving end of its attacks on Lebanon when I was living there, and through the stories of the Nakba, the catastrophe to the Palestinians of 1948. I know I've seen the Star of David on the wings of fighter jets and flying over Lebanon on a sort of almost daily basis. I'm telling you all of this is to sort of give you a sense of my experience, growing up and what I knew and how I knew it, about Israel. Now, about Jews, I did not know a whole lot. I mean, of course, there were many famous Jewish actors and Jews in important positions, leadership positions that we knew about. But the first time that actually my knowledge of Jews went from a monolith to an individual person was when I happened to sit on a committee put together by the government of Ontario to look into hate and hate crimes and victims of hate. And I had a Jewish colleague sitting on my right and one on my left. And these are people representing organizations that advocated for the Jewish community and for Israel. Long story short, I started learning about them as individuals, as people. We were all human rights background folks, so we found that common ground, very quickly. And it got me thinking about what else didn't I know about Jews, the people, the individuals, the human beings. And I wanted to, form a dialogue group, and I did. That was 17 years ago. And the first time I had ever heard that Zionism meant to Jews as a self-determination movement was 17 years ago. I was in my late 40s. So that part of the Jewish narrative, of the Zionist narrative even, was unknown to me. And my Jewish colleagues found out from me that what Zionism gave Jews, it took away from Palestinians, it took away from me. And that set me on that course of intellectual curiosity for many years, of wanting to know more and wanting to benefit other people more. And this book, as a result of my desire to share with other Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims what I learned during my dialogue process, but also to deal with that friction. I mean, that friction that you mentioned, the enmity between two, Canadian communities or two American communities living side by side, who not only did not know each other, they did not want to know each other. They did not want to humanize the other, because once you humanize the other, you start having to compromise, and it's a lot easier if you just leave things the way they are, because it's easy to hate and it's easy to think in terms of binary, good or bad, and that's why we wanted to do this book.
Thank you both. It strikes me that the binary is both something that is so Like it's hard both to hold, but that also reaching out and connecting back to the caring that Jeffrey, like you were articulating, is actually really hard. And it's especially it's challenging to do. And it resonates with me like that the path to our shared future, to a shared safety, is caring for each other. And it's an enormous feat, and even within ourselves. And Raja, as you were talking, like I grew up in Amman, Jordan, and I remember like the only Jews I saw on were on the TV in military fatigues when I was growing up. And when I started talking with Jews 17 years ago, when New Ground was started, that's really when it started. Before that, it was like small interactions here and there. It took years for me to actually fully access the human beings in front of me, and it was enormous. And you don't even realize the walls that exist within you until people start to help you see things. And so with that, I'd like to move to our next question, which, given this catastrophe in Gaza and the massacre on October 7th, what about this book do you especially hope people will talk about right now? And what would you have written any differently?
Are you going to pick a?
I will let you choose.
I pick Raja.
um, you know what? As it turned out, our book was very prophetic. It said exactly how the two communities are going to react to, any event that is even of a much smaller scale of what's been happening in the last 4+ months. Um, so what I would like people to think about now, especially Palestinians and Jews, also their supporters, but especially Palestinian Jews, is to look at how strongly they have reacted to events, how hatefully they have reacted to events, with each side demonizing the other, uh, looking at the other in very binary terms. So for Palestinian supporters, if you do not support an immediate ceasefire, you're thought as, a genocider. And for Israel supporters, if you're asking for a ceasefire or you're not asking for the release of the hostages, then you are a terrorist supporter. And of course, these binaries do not apply to the overwhelming majority of people. And this is really at the heart of our book, is that there are two radically different narratives, to the point that we are unable to listen to this other narrative. And of course, after October 7, any listening that was happening is completely gone. And emotions are running so high, and people are taking these radical positions of, you're either with us or with the terrorists, or you're either with us or with the genociders, that really can demonstrate the our enmity and our estrangement from each other, so very well. Would I have written anything differently? Sadly, no. It's what we wrote is what happened. I know the other day someone suggested maybe we want to add a chapter in a second edition. I don't know what I would put in that chapter. Maybe it will be, few words, as in, we told you so. I mean, I hate to be flippant about this, but it happened.
Yeah. I'm going to start at the end. I don't know what particular things I would do differently. I think what we are doing differently in our conversation since October 7th, I can't say exactly how that would have translated into the book, is to look deeply compassionately into multiple struggles, to not label a particular struggle as more valuable. The largest concern I think that I've had it, continuously, Raj and I have witnessed, is that even when we talk about these poles and these opposites of poles of this or that, positive or negative binaries, we are talking about the most extreme portions of our two communities. We are highlighting, not, for instance, in a protest on Gaza, not the massive amount of conversations about a ceasefire and about protecting lives. We are talking about one person in one sign that said an anti-Semitic statement that was inflammatory. When we hear the Jewish reaction, we're often talking about a relatively small portion, who demonize Palestinians, say that all Palestinians are terrorists. This is not the plethora of our communities. The vast majority of us are struggling. We feel threatened, we feel unsafe, we feel worried about the future. But I don't think we are naturally seeing the absolute worst in the other. I think this is the images that was being projected. The other part, of course, you'll see all the way through our book and all the way through the conversation tonight, is the concept of many to one, exactly as Raja talked about at the beginning, to humanize what is theoretically the other. And, I want to be really clear. We talk a lot about othering. Othering is an action. There is no other until we create them. And if we created it, then we can redefine it. Raja is not my other, he's my brother. I don't see Raja as, I see him as many things. I see him as Palestinian. I him as Arab. I see him, as a guy like me with a bald head. I see him as a, absolutely fabulous Lebanese cook. I smell, his cigars that he smokes at night. I mean, it is the human that creates the possibility of hearing a narrative differently. And I think that is probably the main thing that we see is sorely lacking. Somebody, even tonight, your audience, someone might hone on to one little comment in our book or one little comment that we said that you're finding yourself reactive to. It's okay. React away and then decide what's your long goal. Is your long goal to stay polarized, or is your long goal to learn something that you may not know yet?
Sometimes I tell Jeff that I forget he's Jewish, because it's not something that is essential in our relationship with each other, because it's built on shared values, commitment to justice, commitment to intellectual honesty, commitment to integrity. And often we're asked if October 7 events have affected our relationship. And the first time I was surprised when I was asked, like, why would it affect our relationship? And then I realized, okay, it's a fair question. And the answer was, it made it even stronger, because it really demonstrated to us how committed we are to these shared values and to that shared integrity. In dialogue groups and sitting with people trying to understand each other, it normally, like you said, Aziza, it can take years to be able to cross that barrier. And that barrier really is about trust. I mean, it's about trusting that what the other person is saying, they're not saying it to score points or to prove you wrong. They're saying it because they actually believe it. They actually feel it. And that's when the real listening starts, because you can be sure that there's no harm intended, that your safety is not implicated, that it's an honest conversation, and you can genuinely listen to understand, rather than usually what happens is listening to respond. And this is a very, very key point. And, as it happened, Jeff and I did not take long to click because, our values were so aligned and our honesty, intellectual honesty was so aligned that it happened very quickly.
Just kind of add, I know this is maybe coming in a later question, but I think it's important for your audience. Since October 7th and in times before, we've grieved together. I think that's really important to understand. Certainly in the first few weeks, pretty well every day, we started every conversation with, "How are you?" And the answer was always, "Not good." So we came together in our shared concern, our shared pain, our shared concern for our communities, our shared concern for each other's communities. And the second thing is, I certainly don't want you to think that we never debated anything, but the debate was exactly how Raja talked about it. It was based on intellectual curiosity. He or I would frequently say, "Well, what does it mean when Palestinians do X? What does it mean when Jews say Y?" And there also have been moments, when something we send each other, certainly I think it's happened 2 or 3 times for me where I'm triggered. It feels my tribal trauma, my Jewish trauma is triggered by it. I trust Raja. So right away I call him and I say, "Something's not sitting right. Help me through this. I don't know why I'm reacting to this, but I'm reacting to this." And we listen and we trust. It's practiced. We weren't born good at this. We work at it.
Yes, practice and the courage to say it's not sitting right with me. And the courage to just really show up in your true and full authentic self. And one of the things that you weave in your book is this idea and this commitment to yes and approach, which is like you name this a number of times. You say to Jews, it feels like this, and to Palestinians, it feels like this. You also explain a little bit more, so feel free to lean into that a little bit more here. But how do you hold the sanctity of each truth and experience without minimizing, dismissing the other person when the two are so contradictory, especially with like maybe what has helped you hold contradiction side by side?
Well, there's a few answers, but I'll start. My anchor, is understanding how our brain functions and how trauma works. So counter narratives, things that don't seem to hold in the same space, I process them immediately from where is the suffering or pain that this statement is coming from. So, if we look at one thing, we talk about our book, is Palestinian resistance. So how could one group see resistance as existence and the other group see resistance as a threat to their existence? Because both are rooted in pain. Both reactions are rooted in trauma. So I can hold them together because I hold the root together. I hold the pain together. So we focus more on what is right, not who is right. And by being able to do that, it isn't as hard as you might imagine to hold things that seem like polar opposites at the same time, because you have compassion for where they come from.
When you start by asking people to tell their stories, their personal stories, what they believe in and why, and listen without responding, listen to understand. And you do this over and over and over, it stops being political, it becomes personal. It becomes about the person, not the politics. And you cannot argue with people about their own personal story. It's their personal story. It's not open for discussion. That's their experience. And the aim really is to get to that point of honesty where what people are saying is them, and it's not that piece of propaganda or misinformation or disinformation that they received from one of the many organizations out there that are pushing, um, pushing self-oriented ideas against the other. And if you think of these advocacy organizations, lobby groups, and so on, most of what they say is about demonizing the other. And it's tempting for people to buy in because of their trauma, because that's the tribal line, and it becomes the tribal line, and it's very hard to speak against the tribal line or even differently from the tribal line. So when you have two people sitting together, opening up about their personal experience and gradually distancing themselves from from the party line, from the group think, and becoming one person that is talking to another person, that really goes a long way, and that's respectful and of the sanctity of everyone involved.
I'm just going to ask. We have a large group, so we can't answer this verbally, but I'm going to ask everyone to reflect on something for a second, if I might, Aziza. Have you showed compassion or empathy for someone and had that turned around on you to say that that means you're not empathetic for the other, that you have a scorecard with your empathy? I'm guessing that most of the people on the call have had that experience. We want to let you know that this is a false binary. Compassion is compassion, love is love, hate is hate. Showing care for another never means you don't, de facto means that you don't care for the opposite. So these calls often get, sort of theoretical and stuff, and I really want to bring it home. Show compassion. Don't let someone throw you off by saying, well, that means you're for the other guy. Focus on your compassion, on your care, and your concern. And people, I see a couple of people on the call who know us pretty well. It could be a mistake to think that because we are speaking in this way, we are not ourselves deeply passionate about injustice, and that we don't believe that the central shift that must happen has to be justice, that human life is human life. And if one human life feels like it is being devalued, you must speak about it. Even if somebody says to you, well, you're not caring about the other. The one that is suffering is the one that takes your first attention. And it should. And this suffering has gone back and forth since October 7th, where the focus is laying. In general, care about both deeply. But speaking about the atrocities of Gaza does not lessen my concern for the pain of all of Israel and Jews here on October 7th, or in events that clearly have had some anti-Semitic overtones that have happened here in the West. I hold both in tension, but it doesn't limit my care or concern for a ceasefire, for preserving life, which is my ultimate compass as a Jew and as a person.
I learned so much about Judaism from Jeff, and how it has been really a foundation for his value belief system, and that value belief system turned out to be similar as mine. I even got to like Judaism. I'm not a religious person at all, but there are values in there that I would subscribe to completely.
Yeah, when we can really center around those values or in them and really recommit, or I'm finding myself having to recommit to compassion, especially right now, and owning it in much bigger and different ways, because it was different to own it even before, like I don't know, like 10 months ago or whenever it's been, and to own it now. But to center in that place, and like you said, to hold life as sacred, truly, even when you feel people who are close to you are challenging that. And with that, like especially given the larger context. So both anti-Jewish and anti-Arab or Muslim bias exist in our tribes, in our movements, wherever we sit. How can we better identify the ways that we dismiss each other and put one another's communities at risk here in North America? How do you best hold our communities to account? Like, for instance, anti-Semitism is both baked into our cultures, and anti-Semitism is being weaponized to silence pro-Palestinian voices. Both things are true. How do we navigate it?
So I
I,
think we're going to be on the call till next Thursday evening. Um,
I think we should read the two paragraphs on anti-Semitism from the book, Jeff, because just to demonstrate the power of that argument about anti-Semitism being sort of double-edged.
Yeah, so we do this with each of the sort of flashpoints, or what we call bricks in the wall. And just want to be clear, we use language like to a Jew and to a Palestinian. We don't mean to every Jew or every Palestinian, but the plurality of views. These are very, very, very short paragraphs. And so we're going to read from the anti-Semitism chapter in our book. To a Jew, anti-Semitism is a past trauma, a present trauma, and an almost guaranteed future trauma. Anti-Semitism is a thread that runs through the tapestry of Jewish life. It is ever present, foreboding, and certain. It weaves its way often surreptitiously and silently through even the happiest of times. It is the monster whose haunting presence breathes down one's neck, refusing to allow any Jew to forget its existence.
To a Palestinian, anti-Semitism is a muzzle, a weapon to silence, defend, and deflect from or otherwise discredit critics of Israel's actions. It is the club to clobber the heads of those taking a stand for Palestine, and the shackle that ties down the hands of solidarity. It is the boot that presses down one's neck, choking speech, silencing thought, removing voice, and eliminating hope. It's an occupation of the narrative.
Anti-Semitism is this powerful force that in effect ends up oppressing both Jews and Palestinians. So your core question, Aziza, is how do you make clear distinguishings between these? I'll offer to you that I think we make it harder than it is, because it's in our tribal interest to do so. Lots of discussion on university campuses and other places about the phrase "from the river to the sea." Palestine will be free. I think how you look at it is largely how you choose to look at it. We certainly can't say what every single person who uses that phrase means, but we can say with a surety that the plurality of people who use the phrase are talking about freedom and rights. So when it is stated publicly on a website or in a letter to a politician that this phrase is anti-Semitic, to a Palestinian supporter, you're not only saying that we don't care about your oppression, But the very fact that you voice your oppression is offensive to us. It isn't that hard to call out. You know, alternatively, as has certainly happened since October 7th and other times, when the correlation between the river to the sea is made in expelling Jews, saying they don't matter, it's all our land, you have to leave, we don't care where you go. Of course, that is anti-Semitism, because you're denying the right of a people to live fully. It's complicated. One person might even feel that Jews, I mean, if we're really honest, some people would say, both Jews and Palestinians would say, I want it all. In the end, you can't have it all. So what are you going to do? People always say to us, well, it's so complicated. Well, the details are complicated. The actual problem is not complicated. Two national projects collided in the same space. And 75 plus years later, we haven't figured out how to share. And we're going to have to. And that may not seem just to either side, but it's the reality. It's the fact.
You know, I like to remind people often that, you know, this is not a religious conflict. This is not a religious war. Of course, it has, you know, religious elements within it. You know, the Promised Land and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Temple Mount, and all of those things. But really, it is about land and identity, a national identity. The Jews gained a country and a national identity in 1948. The Palestinians lost it. They have been trying to get it back since, and it hasn't really been going well, you know, for us. I like to also remind Palestinians often that the best defenders of Palestinian rights have been Jews. You know, from Noam Chomsky to the independent Jewish voices to many people. Beinart, pardon?
Sorry, I was just adding excuse me, Gabor Mate to your list.
Gabor Mate, Peter Beinart. I mean, the list is very long. So, you know, it's not about Jews. It's not about Muslims. It's not. I mean, I'm a Christian myself, and my views on Palestine are not any different from, you know, Palestinian Muslims. So, you know, when in a zeal to speak for Palestinian rights, you get into anti-Semitism, you're diminishing our cause. You're diminishing the truthfulness and the legitimacy of the Palestinian cause, which is, you know, to have self-determination and a recognition of the Nakba, of what happened in 1948. So no one does their cause any favor when they get into racist grounds, and you know, we speak about that all the time, and you know, discourage people from muddying the waters more than they are already muddied.
You know, absolutely. And the only thing I'll add is that
you have to add something, don't you? Huh?
I guess I do.
Every time you have to add something. All right, go ahead. Last word. You have to have the last word. Yeah.
No, I don't want the last word. You get the last word. The other thing I was going to say is that, you know, to my community primarily, if I put it really simply, I think having a land where we as Jews can be safe is a wonderful idea. My crisis of faith and consciousness is that what I gained, Raja lost. That's the crux of the problem. It's not that the idea of Jewish safety, or even, I'm personally not a really big fan of ethno-nationalist projects, but even if that is something that we feel we need as a people, I'm okay with it, except that it took from someone else. And that's antithetical to our core values. And that's what we have to wrestle with. I would offer that our community, the Jewish community, is been going through a new traumatic crisis in being able to hold the truth of our 2,000-year history of victimization and our current history of participating or supporting, victimizing someone else. It's caused a schism in our collective brain that we're going to have to find a way to cope with and to deal with, frankly.
As the late Edward Said once said, Palestinians are victims of victims and refugees of refugees. And I have the last word.
Finding, yes, it's where we weave together, and finding ways to really be aware and to still hold true to, like, not only who we are and our values and ourselves, but also to make sure that there's still space for me in the equation. And what that means, it's a delicate tension to navigate. And I'm curious, as you're talking about coping and the brain and all the pieces that connect with that, how do you, as activists, reconcile your own personal grief with the work, especially right now?
After you.
About it. So at its core, we already said that we grieve together. I think the key part for me is, as I've said before, I don't see a tension with caring and supporting and valuing my collective's experience and trauma and caring for Palestinians. I think we are asked to see them as binaries, and I just don't believe that they are. I'm also, I've been doing human rights work for a long time, so I need to be very honest. The daily events of Gaza crush me as a human. Certainly the events of October 7th did as well. But I fear that it has become more about revenge than it has about a military operation. And I have to speak honestly about it because that's what my values tell me to do. Violence does not solve problems, it creates more problems. We cannot militarily work our way out of the crisis. And I fear that our trauma has led us to support things that otherwise we would not support, to turn our eyes away from the horrors of Gaza. Don't. Look at it squarely. It's not antithetical to caring for Jews, to care about the humanitarian absolute catastrophe. There aren't enough words for it that are currently happening. If we, sometimes get called anti-Semitic for calling for a ceasefire. You have to say no to this. You have to say, no, that's not anti-Semitism. That's valuing human life and trying to stop death. I hear how it feels for you. I hear that some of you may hear it as supporting Hamas or being okay with Hamas staying in power. It's not. It's solely about preserving life.
We don't use the word peace a whole lot. We prefer to talk about truth and reconciliation, because there's a whole history here of um, a Palestinian Nakba that started in 1948 and it continues to this day. And that's in the form of continuous loss of land, dispossession, um, not having rights. Even Palestinian citizens of Israel don't have the same rights as Jewish citizens. In the West Bank, 57 years of occupation. In Gaza, occupation, and then blockade. A blockade is so it's not an equal relationship between two countries to have a peace agreement like between Israel and Jordan or Egypt. The Palestinians by and large are an occupied people, and their history is not recognized. For some people, they continue to claim that there is no such thing as a Palestinian. So, and sometimes I get asked questions like, where are the Palestinian peace groups? Well, when you've got your boot on my neck, I'm not thinking about peace. First, I would say I want to breathe, and then we can talk about, peace. But the part of the problem is, and as Jeff mentioned, is that having historically been victims, it's hard for Jews to see themselves as victimizers or as oppressors, and many do not realize the extent of the oppression that is happening in Palestine. The stereotypes, of course, are about violent Arabs, Palestinians. They want to destroy Israel, and they're all terrorists, and they hate Jews, and all that. So, but so it's more about truth and reconciliation than it is about peace. And specific to your question, the grief, it was very hard because first you have grief about what's happening over there. Then you have grief about how our governments here in North America are reacting to it. And then being who we are, being what our message is, we don't want to divert from that message. We want to stick to that message even in the hardest of times. So it's been challenging, but at the same time, our message is being so well received by so many people that it keeps us going, and that's it.
Are there any audience questions, Aziza? Would you like to? I realize that we've talked a lot, but you wanted to leave some time for the audience.
I've gotten a few audience questions, so I'll ask you one brief one before we close out. People are asking about your thoughts and about specifically social media and how representations are happening on TikTok and Twitter, and what you want to lean in on there.
I'll go first. Social media is both a curse and a blessing, and particularly to this context here. The enmities that we see on social media, the language, the hate, the dehumanization, the dirty words, are a complete turnoff, only add fuel to the fire, do not help in any way, and are practically, useless, except that they make things worse. They even add to the polarization. The blessing in social media has been that, we're able to see what's happening on the ground very clearly firsthand from, grassroots reporters turning their cameras on their phones and taping what's happening. And for those who have, for a long time been controlling the narrative, especially in North America or in the West in general, but particularly in North America, are less able to do that now because the truth is a look at your phone away, and if you want to know, and Jeff likes to to talk about wanting to want. You want to explain that, Jeff?
Sure. Well, I think we're talking about, curiosity. You may not be quite at, I really want to know. You might only kind of want to know. And that's all we really ask in the first step. I mean, people come to our sessions who are not really there yet. They're very suspicious of our message. But they came. They showed up. They got on a call. They asked a question. Yeah, I mean, I think we can talk about social media a lot. I think the main concern is that change comes from personal interaction, not from online tweets. I think people on many sides of the discussion, even with the horrible things that Roger was talking about all the bombing, being on your phone, have in some ways become tunneled in pain to the point where they can't function. Do guard yourself, do guard your psyche. There is a limit of what you can take in. And if you're doing a lot of seeing horrors, expose yourself to positive messages. Have coffee with someone who fills you up. It is important to be careful, and we do have choices about what we look at and what we don't look at and how long we look at it.
People often ask us, how do you stick to your values, to your justice approach in the middle of the insanity of what's happening over there? And I'd like to give an example. October 7 happened. Some Palestinians looked at it and they said, so what? 1,200 Israelis were killed. Tens of thousands of Palestinians, innocent Palestinians, have been killed. Another point of view was, yeah, they took hostages. Well, Israel takes hostages all the time. They take women and children and put them in jail without charge. So, that's the same thing. Another point of view is, well, Israel has been, blockading Gaza for 16 years, starving people and impoverishing them. Sort of, they had it coming. Now, the facts cited in the first part of an argument, Israel has killed many Palestinian civilians, are true. But then coming to the conclusion that this justifies the killing of Israeli civilians is where you've lost your moral compass, you've lost your values. The killing of civilians is not good. It's not a good thing. It should be banned throughout, to everybody. And when Palestinians kill civilians, we should be able to call it out. On October 7, a war crime happened. Every day since, war crimes have been happening to the other side. We should be able to see both. And that's how you stick to your values.
Truly sticking to your values and holding true to them. To close us out, I'm hoping you can both reflect on your concept of justice that you raise in the book, that it's our rudder and it's important to take a values-based approach. So what are the steps in order to take a value-based approach? Can you give us a little bit more concrete examples?
Sure. Well, we talk about 3 basic shifts of thinking. I think I mentioned the first one a little bit earlier. In our book, we call it from many to one. And so if you just imagine trauma is sort of anesthetized by numbers. So if you think of Jewish trauma as 6 million murdered in the Holocaust, it's unfathomable. Can't take it in. So what we try to think of is 1 Jew murdered 6 million times. It's impossible to take in 750,000 displaced Palestinians, but 1 Palestinian displaced 750,000 times. There's a human story, 750,000 human stories and 6 million human stories. That's the first part, is to create a human interaction. The second is This is a problem in all areas of conflict. We have difficulty separating the past from the present. We had a conversation earlier today where we were talking about how the Holocaust in some ways becomes frozen in Jewish memory. This horror is transfixed, and transfixing it allows you to think that there's no way it would ever stop, that it will always happen and will always happen again. It's really, really important to begin a purposeful process of being able to distinguish from what happened and what's happening. And even if there are some similarities, it doesn't mean they're the same. And it doesn't mean that because a trauma happened here and happens here, it will always happen over here. Last, and perhaps the big one, resist with all of your might the concept of groupthink. It is deeply built into the culture of today to polarize, to not think of the other as someone you disagree with, but someone you hate. And the way that has happened is really by everybody following one message and ignoring all of the other story. Siloing your news into one place, siloing your information into one place, siloing your narrative into one place. If you want to hold to your values, you must force yourself to listen to contrary information, to uncomfortable, disquieting information. And last, apply your values consistently. When you notice that your value is tribalized, question it. And Raja, I would love you to have the last word.
Yeah, and you gave me what, 2 minutes to do that. Yeah, I mean, there's no justice for one and not the other. That's not justice. I mean, justice has to be, both ways. And one of the most painful things, and I alluded to this before, to me as a Canadian, is to lose faith in my country, in my government, in its ability to be just and to apply justice and its values consistently. When Russia attacked Ukraine, we condemned Russia, went to the rescue of Ukraine. When Hamas attacked Israel on October 7, we expressed complete support for Israel, condemned Hamas. And then for 4 months, Palestinians are being slaughtered. And we have a US government that is vetoed 3 ceasefire UN resolutions so far. That's clearly not justice. That's double standards. That's using your values selectively, and it alienates people, and it frustrates them, and it angers them, and it makes them question their citizenship, even if they are immigrants like me. So, it's I can't wait for this war to end, for this and for us to be able to have these kinds of conversations without that shadow hanging over our heads. Thank you for having us tonight.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for your interest in our work and for the work of New Ground.
Thank you for really leading us through with really solid examples and reminders about what it means to ground ourselves in our values, and especially in our compassion, and to apply them consistently. We're grateful that you're with us, and now we're going to transition to the next portion of our program and invite anyone. Thank you. If we could thank all of our thank our authors as they transition out. We're going to be transitioning now to breakout rooms. This is an invitation for you to join. We are grateful that you took the time, and I know that a number of things were spoken today that were likely hard to hear and are important to wrestle with and to continue to wrestle with. And so I hope you will, and I hope you'll continue to reach out to us and that you'll join us in the breakout sessions. We have skilled facilitators for each of our breakout sessions. What you can expect is 30 minutes and the opportunity to actually express what your concerns are, what's on your heart, and some of the things that they brought up that you want to continue talking about. We'll start that in just a moment. You'll be asked to join a breakout room, and then we will close out each breakout room. Each facilitator close out their own breakout room, and you'll say goodnight from there. But we are really grateful that you took the time and are still taking the time, because we need to be able to talk about these hard things, especially right now. So with that, I say thank you and good night to anyone who needs to leave, but please join us in the breakout rooms.